Hi, welcome back to FutureFast, and those of you who are here for the first time, FutureFast is an effort to bring in people who are doing things and working towards changing things which are going to have a positive impact in the future. And towards that effort, we have our guest Bart Remes, and most importantly, those of you who are here for the first time, then I really urge you to please look up the previous podcast where we had Bart take us through his journey, which is amazing. And also, I urge you to listen to that and come back here because you may find a lot of continuity from a thread point of view as why he's in the school of Austrian School of Economics, and so we will not be getting into that conversation herein. So why and what is the context and all? It really helps if you just listen to that conversation and then come into here. And for the rest, enjoy the ride as much. And I thoroughly enjoyed my previous conversation. So Bart, I'm seriously looking forward to enjoying this. And thank you so much for making time to come back with this as well.
Yes, hello Nanju. Good to see you again. My pleasure.
Thank you. So, Bart, while you took us through in our previous conversation as why you chose this, so I want to, get this conversation going from a point of how are you taking in this uh, uh, this though so very practical a subject, right? But at the same time, it has been rendered to be very theoretical or an aspect of academic value rather than a business case. While we did speak in our last conversation as this is so much more practical and commonsensical, but from a business point of view, when you approach it as a business proposition and when you take it to small and medium businesses, I presume that is your target audience, right? The small and medium businesses.
Yes, that's my target audience. My clients are small
Usually come from there, right?
and entrepreneurs, right?
So how are you able to take this, what is traditionally perceived as a very theoretical proposition, into a business case? How are you doing it? I mean, that is something really curious also about.
All right. Okay. So there are two things here. So the first element is that when you talk to people like, what do you do? Oh, I'm an economist. All right, that's good. That's not bad. Economics, that's the stuff about supply and demand. And then when you study a little bit of economics, you always have these graphs with the supply line and the demand line. One line is going up and the other line is going down. Now, the reality is that when people do business, they never sit in front of them with little charts of supply and demand. So, as you know, I'm based in Singapore. When I go to the business center of Singapore, which is Raffles Place, amongst others, where the financial heart of Singapore is, you walk around on that place, you see all these bankers and finance guys and business guys walking around, stressed, smoking cigarettes downstairs, but nobody is sitting in front of them with little charts of supply and demand. It's like, how can you use that? How can you use that in business? And so the thing with supply and demand and how that relates to understanding what's happening in sales. For that, you need to go a couple of years back. You need to go back to the 70s. And I'm not saying, I don't mean the 1970s. I'm talking about the 1870s. Yeah. So like granted a couple of years ago, okay, more than almost 150 years ago. And around that period of time, what happened is in economic theory, three people discovered, independent from each other, why people want to pay a certain price for some things. And so the truth is, and that's important for entrepreneurs as well as for big businesses, because people do not always get that. The important truth is that things don't have value. It sounds very strange. Gold does not have value. And talking to an Indian audience, that may sound like heresy, but things don't have value. In economics, there is no such thing as intrinsic value. Of course, gold or silver has physical intrinsic elements to it. Okay. But the reason many people like gold is because they like it. So value is in the mind of people. I like it because I like it. I like it a lot, or I want it. I don't like it at all, or I need it, or I want it urgent, or I don't need it at all. So it's very subjective. So the thing with value is that value is subjective. That is very important. There is no such thing as intrinsic value. That was discovered in 1870. And why is that important? In my first job.
Can we also say perceptive? It is more a perception of value than value, independent of it.
Yeah, it's perceptive or subjective. So some people will say, I like apples. Others say, I don't like apples, I like oranges. You can't judge, like it's just you. So that's important. And how does this relate to business? Is that there are quite some businesses that say, you know what? And it happened in my first company where I worked for. They say, it's very expensive for us to produce this thing and to pay for all the R&D and then to do the marketing. So the cost that we have is this and this and this. Yeah, that's the cost. So the price should be a little bit above that. If not, we can't make a living. And it happened to me when I started in my first company. I mentioned that in an earlier conversation that we had in the first podcast. Okay. And so I was selling modems. It was the beginning of the internet and computer systems and stuff, computer communications, selling modems. And so that was a company, small company, and the way it cost us to produce these modems was much more expensive than what Cisco was doing. And so the sales director, I still remember, he told me, he said, you have to go to the clients and tell them that our price is, let's say, double the price of Cisco because it's so expensive for us to make it. So do you think it was successful? Totally not. So the important thing is value is in the mind. So as an entrepreneur, what you have to do is you have to come up with an idea to say, I can create XYZ, which I'm going to sell to Mr. ABC,
Right.
or Madam, whatever. And the price is the price. It's your job to figure out how to produce it at a price that's lower than they want to pay for. It's common sense, but people forget about it. Yeah.
Actually, there was recently there was an article about finding of a meteor, not going to hit Earth, but going to pass near Earth, and that meteorite is supposed to have such a large concentration of gold.
Okay.
Right, that the amount of gold that is there, if mined and distributed across the population of 8 billion people on the earth, it could make each individual, 8 billion of us, a billionaire each. So that was a small news report I read, and that is assuming that the gold value remains same.
Okay, no, I didn't read about
So,
that meteor.
but
That's
the funny part is, if 8 billion people get $1 billion worth gold, will the gold be as valuable at all?
no. The reason why gold has value and like silver has value, and why these things eventually became money, which is money is a generally accepted medium of exchange, is because there is only a limited amount of gold. You just can't go and say, hey guys, I'm going to organize an expedition and I'm going to find 5 tons of gold. Doesn't work like
Oh,
that.
incidentally, now in USA now, space exploration is legal or permissible.
Mm-hmm.
So two startups have come forward and are preparing for it and saying that they are going to explore for gold on those meteorites and they would like to bring to Earth.
Uh,
So,
good luck to them. That's all I can say. So, but no, the
right,
point.
sorry, I just deviation, but I thought it was
No,
interesting.
so the point I try to make is that in order to make economics practical, so like you have this chart of supply and demand, okay, and that chart was invented about around 1890, 1890. Yeah. Previously to that, people always have been doing business. The old Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, etc. People always have been doing business without ever using that graph of supply and demand. One line up, the other line going down. And economists, mainstream economists, I explained in the previous conversation that we had what mainstream economists are. That's a school of Keynesian economics. They believe that when these two lines cross, you have an equilibrium and everything is fine. Now, when you think about an entrepreneur or a business, okay, your company is never in equilibrium. At the end of the year, when you close the books and people, the investors or whoever it is, they ask you, how's business? You don't say, oh, my company is in perfect equilibrium. That's like, that's rubbish. they will want to know you, what are you going to do next year? How much are you going to grow, etc. So, but going back to what happens during the sales process is it's something that's called double inequality of value. So remember, a value is subjective. Yeah. So I like it because I like it. In French, there is an expression that says les goûts et les couleurs ne se discutent pas, which means taste and colors are not open for discussion. I like blue because I like blue, or I like red because I like red. There is no logical explanation for that. I like BMWs, good. I like Toyotas, good. I mean, you can't judge. That's part of life. Now, what happens in the sales process? That is that little dot where these two lines cross. The supply line and the demand line. And so I believe that your favorite color is red, right? So I hope I'm correct with that. Okay, you
We'll
say,
go with that, yeah.
so just imagine that your favorite color is red.
Right.
My favorite color is blue, right? So like, okay, like can't judge, like it is what it is. So now you happen to have a Lego brick which is blue. Yeah. So for visuality, Lego, a bigger Lego brick which is blue, right? So and I happen to have a Lego brick that is red. Yeah. So, but of course, I prefer blue over red, and you prefer red over
Right.
blue. So what are we going to do? Hey, you're going to change. Because if I give you my red Lego brick, okay, you will be happier, and you give me in return the blue. So I'm happier. So both in the sales process, both the buyer and the seller take a better position, because both buyer and seller are better off. That's exactly what happens in every sales, which is double inequality of value. So in example, a couple of, let me give you two examples of that. So this is pure economics in action. So there is a movie called The Thomas Crown Affair from the late 1960s with Steve McQueen playing Thomas Crown. And Thomas Crown is a very successful business guy, Harvard MBA. He's doing arbitrage, real estate, blah, blah,
The
blah.
same thing was made with Pierce Brosnan again.
Yes, yeah, in the 1990s. Yeah. I prefer the original movie, but it's up to you, because after all, value is subjective, right?
Absolutely.
But the thing is,
Yeah.
when you watch the original Steve McQueen movie, he's going to sell one of his office buildings, and he sits there at a conference table, not with a chart of supply and demand. He sits there with his finance guy, his marketeer, his secretary, his accountant, the whole lot. At the other side of the table, you have the other team. So they have signed up the contracts, and Steve McQueen, the cool guy, king of cool, that was his nickname, he sits there like, all right, takes a pen, signs a piece of contract, deal is done. The other guy that buys the building, he says, oh, you sold it too cheap. And Steve McQueen reverses and says, no, you pay too much money for it. So here's what happens. That's economics in action. So one party looks at the same building, steel construction with cement, with copper, with windows, what the whole lot, how you make a skyscraper. One person thinks the value is too low. The other guy thinks the value is too high. That's why they sign the contract and do the deal. Double inequality of value. That's what happens in every business transaction. Another example is you go to a supermarket. What does a supermarket do to you? So you enter the supermarket, you have $10 in your pocket, whatever. And so on all the shelves, the supermarket displays their products. Milk, bananas, rubber boots, bottles of whiskey, whatever. So eventually you make your choice. You say, I'm going to buy the bottles of milk. So you take the bottles of milk from the rack, you put it in your trolley, you go to the cashier. You give your $10 to the cashier. You get your bottles of milk. What happens? Double inequality of value, because the $10 you have in your pocket is not as valuable to you as the milk the supermarket gives you in return. From their perspective, the opposite. The milk is not expensive at $10 they ask from you. So that is what happens in business and what happens in every sales process. Naturally, in order to get to that moment, to clinch the deal, that's where marketing comes in, which is another part of economics. So I just wanted to highlight this to give you a practical example on how you can use economics in day-to-day life.
Oh, perfect. What I'm curious is, how do you productize this? Right. One is that yes, it is necessary, and it has a huge ramification if you don't employ it in the right way. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and most of the entrepreneurs, see, I included, right, that we do a lot of reading. I think most entrepreneurs read,
Mm-hmm.
read. or listen to books. Lately, I listen more than I read.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think uh, people or entrepreneurs are intuitively driven to learning new things and keeping themselves updated about what's happening and how to do things, what somebody else is doing, how are they being different, and how do I keep doing. So that learning is always there. But only thing what happens is that various learning uh, we tend to employ in our whatever we are doing. Uh, we find our own ways of doing it versus what you're talking about is a very structured approach to doing, particularly from a point of employing economic and economic theories into
Hmm.
practice, right? Most of the time we do things, we uh, obviously have understanding and also understand various scenarios, market scenario, compliance, and supply side of the issues, and also the demand, right? It's just not one aspect of it, and also the customer's perspective of it from a point of where they are coming to what other options they have. So various other aspects are there. So we do look at it, and we also come with this. And many of us come from some learning from business schools. So you do have your business school teachings coming from five P's and all those kind of learning
Yeah.
that you come, which I'm sure have consumed a lot of economic theories and learnings into it, but the whole representation is very different, right? So when people come from these kind of backgrounds, how do you productize this? Am I getting through with my question? Am I able to get through with what I'm trying to ask you on this?
Um, I would say that in business schools,
Mhm.
um, my perspective is, and maybe I'm wrong, okay, but this is just my perspective, is that people teach you in business schools that you hire a sales department or you hire salespeople, and they will take care of the sales for you. And by hook and by crook, they will have to go out and sell. Um, a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners are actually not very happy to do sales because they think it's a dirty job and it's a sleazy job. Okay, it's like you can sell ice to the Eskimos, so to speak. But what happens in sales is that that principle of double inequality of value. Like um, I sell this thing to you, and you will be better off. And you give this thing to me in return. Most likely, it's going to be money, and I will be better off. The important element here is it has to be on a voluntary basis. So you cannot go to a client or a prospect and put a gun in their face and say, buy this from me. That doesn't work, right? Only one party will benefit. But so if you understand that in sales, both parties benefit, yeah, then you have a different perspective on sales. And again, most executives, especially at MNC level, they have no clue what sales is all about. And you see that sometimes like, oh, times are bad. What shall we do? Let's cut cost. In which department? I have a great idea. Let's cut marketing costs. It's like taking a shotgun and shooting a bullet in your foot. Like, so marketing and sales, if you don't have that, your business goes bust. And I referenced to that in the earlier conversation we had with the example of Nokia and BlackBerry and
Correct,
Apple.
correct, right. Yeah, please go ahead. In fact, there is uh, one more thing. See, businesses have been using a lot of theories, and also uh, large enterprises uh, uh, tend to use it, and it also sometimes becomes very manipulative, right? For for smaller businesses to keep up with.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, how do you think this can be an advantage for small and medium businesses also to use these mental models and the uh, the 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 structured approach to employing economic tools, economic studies in their businesses to also compete with large businesses? How do you think that one is okay? There is an established use case, there's a need, and of course, business schools have one way of doing it, and which is yes, there are a lot of limitations in
Mhm.
the approach to it. But how how does this give them as good an approach, if not better the
Yeah,
whole
yeah, yeah,
proposition?
yeah. Um, uh, when you talk about business schools, MBAs. Okay, let me just say something very mean that may upset your audience. So MBA stands for Master of Business Administration. Yeah. And in my view, the key letter in MBA is the letter A. How to administrate a business, how to make the engine run smooth. It's not about figuring out what a customer wants. Maybe people in your audience may say, oh, I have a different perspective. Entirely agree. Okay, possible. But you cannot be successful in business by just doing the administration and assume that people will come knock on your door and buy from you. What I also often hear from people that work for large corporations is that we need to look after the shareholders. Yeah. Guys, work hard because sell as much as you possibly can because we need to make sure that the shareholders are happy. Now,
Right.
if you transpose that idea to an MNC or to an entrepreneur, okay, so I have my own company, I'm the shareholder of my company. Do you think I'm going to go to my people and say, guys, you need to work very hard and increase the sales because we need to look after the shareholder, which is, by the way, me. So work hard to make me rich. That doesn't work.
Oh, right.
So you can't do that. Maybe you can get away with it in a large corporation, but fundamental is always to understand that the real boss of the company is not the shareholder. The real boss of the company is not the owner, the shareholder. The real boss is the client. If the client stops buying, your business goes down.
But just here, uh, I don't know how many times you travel to India, but next time when you visit India, I would urge you to go to even smallest possible towns, small
Yeah,
shops. You will notice a small board of sorts behind,
yeah,
wherever the cashier sits, they will have a small messaging. It is usually in the native language, right? Whatever, whether they speak English, Hindi, or
yeah,
Kannada
yeah,
in Karnataka, Telugu, or Tamil, whatever. Most of the small traders, despite coming from different within India, for ages, right? Many a
yeah,
times they may not even done proper schooling, but the messaging is always about customer is God.
yeah. And that is exactly correct. When you go to, an example, when you go to, I'm from Europe, when you go to the Western Europe,
Do
continental
you see
Europe,
the
and
same thing?
similar signs, which
Okay.
says, thank you for your business. Yeah. Which means that thank you clients for buying from us. So these people, they really understand that if
Correct.
nobody walks through the door,
Forget business schools. They may not even gone to colleges, but this
yeah,
message is there.
no, exactly. And also it's like something that I mentioned in the first conversation we had. successful entrepreneurs, they actually understand real economics, common sense economics, which is for me the theoretical approach is Austrian School of Economics. Go back to the first conversation, etc., to figure out what that was. But the customer is the king. An Austrian school economist, his name is Ludwig von Mises, he says that the captain is not the real boss of the ship. The captain may decide where the ship is going to go to, but the real boss of the ship is the client. So you have to listen to what the client wants. And if the client doesn't want to buy what you have to offer, and you only can figure that out with the Lego bricks, that's just the analogy. Do you want this? I'll give you this. Then sorry, goodbye. You go bankrupt. That's a hard truth. That's a system of profit and loss.
Well, just there. Now, how do you work with entrepreneurs who are trying to build products like iPod or an iPhone, right? Wherein at that point of time, when Apple, led by Steve Jobs, then when they started building those things, it was not in response to demand, right? It was not that consumers wanted it. In fact, I remember first time around the time when iPods came in, right? I remember seeing it on my computer that Steve Jobs presentation. I used to always watch Steve Jobs presentation. I'm sure. I don't
Yeah.
know. It was always a thrill. It was like not wanting to miss your favorite actor's movie.
Yeah.
His presentations
Yeah.
were so good. So he says that these are made so intuitive, anybody can learn to use it in 3 seconds. That was the statement.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay. And I was visiting a customer, a client at that time. This was a long time back, right? Around 2006 or so.
Mm-hmm.
I was waiting to go into, I mean, outside his cabin, he had another guest, and I was waiting for him. And one other sales guy came in, very evidently carrying a sales bag and all that. And uh, it was after 6 o'clock. The receptionist was not there. And I was just curious. I asked him, have you come in with an appointment? Because I had an appointment to see him. So
Yeah.
he said, it's just 2 minutes, if you don't mind. I just have some document to give him. I said, okay. And he had a box in his hand. I asked him, what's that? He said, oh, I won a Best Salesman Award and they gave me an iPod.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I said, oh, wow. It's not even yeah, they got it from Singapore, but it's all in Chinese. I don't even know how to use it. I said, you don't mind? Can I take a look at it? He said, do you know Chinese? I said, no, I don't know Chinese. But I saw Steve Jobs say that it takes only 3 seconds for anybody to use it. So I want to try it.
Mm-hmm.
He said, see, I tried. It's all Chinese. So, I
Yeah.
don't know what to do with this, but okay, you can try it. I opened it. Believe me when I say that it took me 3 seconds to go and change the language to English.
Okay. Yeah.
And thereafter, it was just as easy to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I gave him and he was very excited. But coming back, I mean, not as much from a relevance of the story, but the context here is that, see, here was a product which is not what the customer wanted, but when the customer got it, he just loved it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in this context, how do you approach
Okay.
employing
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for that one, there are two schools of thought in this one. The first school of thought is that you need to do market research and test out your product as soon as possible with potential clients. Yeah, so that's one school of thought. And a key book that explains that is a book called Scientific Marketing by a man named Claude C. Hopkins. Okay. Claude C. Hopkins is like Claude, and then the letter C, and then Hopkins. Yeah. So scientific marketing.
CLAUD.
CLAUDE. Claude
Claude.
Hopkins. Yeah.
Hopkins.
Yeah. Scientific marketing. It's a book written around 1920. It's a book that influenced David Ogilvy from.
Okay.
So you can download that book free of charge on the internet. And so the gist of that book is, whenever you launch a campaign and you launch a product, check it out, because if you can sell it to, if you cannot sell it to 100 people, how can you think to sell it to 1 million people? So it's one of these cult books. So on the other side, you have a guy like Steve Jobs, and he says, don't ask the customer what they want, show them the product, and then they will know what they want. Yeah, and so that's where this iPod, iPhone, all these things come in. Like, I'm going to create a phone without buttons, and everybody stands there with a BlackBerry with tons of buttons. Right? So these are two different views.
Yeah, his experiments with this started even before that, with iTunes also. If you remember iTunes those days.
But so the thing is that the reason entrepreneurs make profits, and that's important for your audience, is actually you cannot calculate any probability that people are going to buy it or not going to buy it, because it's all very heterogeneous. So you just have to figure it out, which is why entrepreneurship, it's something you can't learn it in a business school, which is also why successful entrepreneurs usually did not go to school for a long time, right? You mentioned the example of Reliance. So the way profits come about is an entrepreneur that says, I'm going to do this, this, and this, right? I think I'm right. Maybe I tested it out in the market, which is Claude Hopkins, or maybe I can imagine to know what a client wants. Both scenarios are possible. Then I'm going to spend some money to build whatever it is that I'm going to build. And then I present it to the market. That's the moment of truth. That's the moment of the Lego bricks, the blue and the red ones. If it works, you make money. If it doesn't work, you don't make money. So profit and loss is actually based on an entrepreneur making a decision. And the entrepreneur takes a risk. The entrepreneur takes a speculative risk. He's a speculator. It's like, is it going to work? Put a finger in the air. That's what it's all about.
So, and this is where you think, or you obviously approach that having a better understanding of economics and employing these economic tools and mental models makes your risk worthwhile, because you're able to take better informed decisions.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So you never know if you could guarantee 100%. Hey, great, we would all be fantastic, successful entrepreneurs, but most of us are not. So it's a matter of figuring it out. But the way to figure it out is by using these economic principles, which I translate as mental models, like as the Lego bricks, the idea of profit and loss. And then you have to take action and see if it works or not.
Right. And how do you see, or can you talk about some small or mid-sized companies that you're either working with or that you observe, not the large enterprise, but who are using these kind of models and who are doing something really interesting?
All right. So I have someone, an entrepreneur in India, to relate to your home location, who is in the agricultural space, working with farmers to explain farmers how their business actually works and how they can improve on this. And he told me something which I was very proud and happy about. He said, well, thanks to the economic mental models that you gave me, at least I have a much deeper insight of what I should tell to these farmers and how their business works. Because prior to that, I was just counting bags of rice and counting bags of grain and stuff like that, and trying to fight against regulations and stuff. But at least now I see how the whole concept of business works. And to me, I was very happy about that. So many people, they think that economics is something which is very complex, and it is not that easy. And that's why many people say, like, why should I even put in a little bit of effort to try to understand it? Let's just give up on it. And I flow around with the stream in the river.
No, I think it is unfortunately their own lack of understanding. In fact, somewhere, I think farmers have a far better understanding of economics as well. I also like to see that farmers actually are, in true sense, capitalists. They understand the cost of seed, cost of effort.
Yeah.
They understand the implication of policies, even discounts or tax stops and benefits and exemptions. They
Yeah.
understand the challenges of selling at various levels and chains, and they understand the supply chain limitation. So they are, in true sense, capitalists, but somewhere the whole ecosystem for a long time has been painting them to be that old usage in English, right? Peasantry,
Yeah.
right? Which is so demeaning of sorts, right?
Yeah.
So it is in a very unfortunate positioning of this whole thing. And also, unfortunately, market also contributes to it, because in India, 60% jobs are in the agriculture space, but the contribution of agriculture as an industry or a sector, if you look at it, to the GDP of India is less than 19%.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay,
So that is where the overall outlook, and also because government keeps giving out so much of sops to the agriculture, the farmers per se, that uh, generally there is in the business community, they tend to look at, okay, farmers tend to just take
yeah.
benefits, right? Whereas if you actually look at, they're a very strong economic tool, and they understand economics, if not better, as much as any other entrepreneur.
It also has to do with when you are forced to understand economics, then you learn it
Right,
in a very practical way. Now, so the way economics is explained to students at colleges, universities, MBA programs is in a very theoretical way, that when you really think about it, and I mentioned that to you in our first conversation, is like,
correct.
what on earth can I do with this thing in my real life? The answer is nothing. It's like, it's not practical. So,
Right, right,
but there
right.
is a practical way to look at these things. So the way profits come about is just to try to figure out, if I combine this and this and this, and I make something, I have to pay my suppliers and my employees.
Right.
I take a big risk, but I know how to present it to the market because I know marketing. Whoops, I can make money. If not, sorry, you don't make money. And you see that actually very often. When I walk around here in Singapore, which is a country where I'm based, sometimes you walk into a shopping center and you see these retail spaces closed. It's very sad, because somehow it is someone's money that he invested in renting that space and buying stuff to try to sell there. It's somebody's dream that blew up into hot air. So when you understand economics, I would say there is no guarantee that you're going to become rich. That's up to you. But at least you will make the better decisions, or you make faster decisions, and you will make less mistakes than the guy that doesn't understand economics.
What do you think the industry bodies and do you see them employing it? Have you do you see that uh, perhaps industry bodies and forums, they obviously do employ more from a point of making reports and recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
uh, right? Uh, uh, but do you see them trying to even educate? Is there any effort such? Is there any interaction that you're having on those sides? Anything happening on that front?
Um, it's something that I don't see. These
Mhm.
people that are working for these industry bodies, you always have to ask yourself the question: who who pays them? Where does the money come from? And that usually comes from the government. So the people that work in those positions,
Well,
they are
yes and no. Some
bureaucrats.
of them, some of them are actually also paid by the member organizations, right? Member organizations
Mhm.
pay, and that
Yeah,
sustains
yeah,
the offices. Yeah.
yeah. Um, yes, say for Chamber of Commerce,
Mm.
or for certain institutions, um, what I can see is I do that Austrian School of Economics, like I mentioned you in our first
Right.
conversation.
Right.
Um, that line of thought is gaining more and more success. When I was at university, you were not supposed to know anything at all about
Mm.
Austrian School of Economics, but now it becomes more and more popular. Um,
Who are
in the
the people who are leading this conversation now across the globe on the Austrian school?
Okay, so to give you a little bit of an illustration, in the 1970s, the whole school of thought was Keynesian School of Economics. And there is an Austrian school economist, a guy named Murray Rothbard. And they asked him, like, hey, how many of these Austrians are still alive? What? So he said, he came up with a crazy number. He said, was it now 6 or 16? So, but that was when the whole theory was about to die. But now there is a big revival that comes up, especially in US, where you have, say, the Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, that's Foundation Economic Education. You have the Mises Institute. You have a couple of other organizations that really promote this thing. It's not as popular yet as it should be. The biggest employer of economics, and by that I mean mainstream economics, the biggest employer is the US Federal Reserve. And so they make sure that everybody thinks like a mainstream economist, which means business is not important. The government will make sure that you will become rich through fiscal policy and monetary policy and whatever we can come up with. Again, I explained something about that in the first conversation we had.
Correct. We did. We did. So, how do you see this changing in the future? Who will be driving it? Do you think there is a need for more of these academic institutions uh, driving the Austrian School of Economics, or do you see businesses adopting it and they in turn will push back and get more academic institutions to work? Where do you think the future lies in this context?
I believe it lies with entrepreneurs. In example, with people like me that make a business out of explaining to other entrepreneurs how they can use those insights by the Austrian school to improve their business, to run their business leaner, smarter, faster. I don't see it coming out of the academic world. Ludwig von Mises was one of the key guys in the Austrian School of Economics. So in US, you have the Mises Institute, which is now based in the south of US, in Alabama. That's I didn't visit it yet. It's the deep south. Then you also have the Foundation Economic Education in New York. But in one of our conversations we had is there's also a Mises sort of institute in India.
It's not Mises Institute. It's basically an alumnus of Mises.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
So it's more of an alumnus of Mises have started some kind of a online initiative more to spread word about Mises. So it's not official Mises as I came across, but yes.
Yeah. Another thing that I noticed is that big investment companies, large and big investment companies, when you apply for jobs with them, a question that is very asked, or very often very asked is, do you know Austrian School of Economics?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Which is it okay to talk about?
No, I can't mention exactly which one, but
okay.
it's like that becomes more and more important. And the reason why they ask that is because in terms of business cycles, so sometimes you have good economic times, bad economic times, good, and then a big recession, etc. The Austrian school, they have a very solid business cycle theory. So when you understand that stuff, you can predict when the next recession is going to come. Now, you can't predict that with Swiss watch precision time. That day, the 23rd of May, 2023 at 11 o'clock in the evening, the crash will go. Impossible to do so. But when you understand the cause and effect that is running in the real economy, how entrepreneurs sometimes make very bad decisions, then you can look at certain indicators and say, in 6 months or in 12 months, there will be a recession. And as a business person, you can put your company in the position to take advantage of that.
Right. I just want to quickly bring you to this aspect that how do you see the theory of causality here in this context?
All right. Well, in economics, just like as in every other science, it is always related to cause and effect. So it's like as in physics, in chemistry, in medicine, you name it. Economics is about cause and effect. Yeah. In example, today we live in a situation of high inflation. Yeah. So why did these prices all of a sudden go up? Okay. The mainstream, and you read about that in the newspapers, on the classic news websites and stuff like that. Why do prices go up? It's because of Putin and his war with from Russia to Ukraine and his oil. Or it's because of in Ukraine there is not enough agricultural stuff that produced anymore, blah blah. That's why prices go up. That is actually big BS. When you understand economics, you'll see that most of international business is conducted in US dollars. And so US dollars, like it or not, they play a big role, not only in the US economy, but also in the rest of the world. Other important currencies are the euro, or the Japanese yen, or the Swiss franc, or on the periphery, it can be the Singapore dollar, so to speak. So when you look at the balance sheets of these central banks, of the US Federal Reserve, in example, the amount of money that they had was in 2008 was $800 billion. Okay, so just keep the number 800 in your mind. Then when they did quantitative easing to save the banks, okay, was very important. They thought the amount of money went up from 800 to 2.1 trillion. That's more than double. Then
Yeah,
they
it's
did,
almost 3 times.
yeah,
Yeah,
then they
2.7 times. Yeah.
then they did another round of QE, and then a third round. So by then, the amount of money had gone up from 800 billion to almost 5 trillion. Then that Chinese COVID came about, and then we have to save the economy again. That was under President Biden. So they started printing again. So I can't explain how the mechanism works in the context of this podcast. It's part of the courses. So now the balance sheet of the US Federal Reserve has grown from 800 in 2008 to almost 10 trillion. So that is more than 10. So the amount of money they printed out of nowhere has increased times
So
10.
essentially, what they did is just printed, nothing
Yeah,
else. It's
yeah,
just print and push.
yes. Where do you think inflation come from? Okay, it's obvious. Europe did the same, Japan did the same, etc. But they tell people in the newspaper, on the websites, on the evening news, that it's Mr. Putin and his oil and blah blah blah. It's BS. It's BS. Yeah. Now, of course, you can say for India, hey, but we don't use US dollars, and that's correct. You have the Indian rupees, but
But we surely have an impact. I mean,
yeah,
pretty much every foreign trade, except very recently, thanks to the same Ukraine war, that we actually could trade in rupee with Russia for the fuel.
the same applies to Singapore, where I'm based. So Singapore doesn't have an, a central bank. So they have something which is called a reserve currency, which acts as a central bank, which means that it manages the banking system. But very important, and that is what makes the Singapore dollar so strong, is Singapore systematically cannot print Singapore dollars out of nowhere. When Singapore left Malaysia, it was decided in parliament, guys, we are not going to do that. We are not going to print money out of nowhere. And it was a fantastic decision that they made. So, which is one of the reasons why the Singapore dollar remains so strong. And yet you have inflation in Singapore because of the international business. All these tons of extra US dollars coming out of nowhere, they fly inside the country. Like,
I think, Bart, I think that's I think we should probably do a separate podcast calling the bullshit.
yes, it's
I
yes,
think
this is not. You're not
yeah,
supposed to know this, but at least now you know, right? So now you can perhaps do something about it. And
correct. I think we should probably do a separate session and title it as calling the bullshit.
no,
And
in
I think it's wonderful. But just to get you back into the conversation, because I think this is a topic which can easily take
yeah,
everything else out.
we are getting offline. I admit. Okay, yeah,
No, but thanks for bringing it, and we should seriously do that. I'm very interested in indulging with you more on that, and also perhaps share some of my theories around that as well. So I think we should probably I'll take back with you on that to do that if we can do a open-ended
yeah,
CBS show on that. So so coming back, I understand we're running close. So how do you how far do you think we will have? Even in smaller companies, we always have a role called chief executive officer, chief operating officer. Most companies have chief technology officers, right? Lately, we also have a role called chief business officer, or CBO, as they call it,
Never heard
right?
of it. Okay, yeah, never heard of it.
Oh, it is there. In fact, uh, anyway, after so large enterprises have this role called chief economist,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? So, how far do you see in time that the smaller, medium companies, or even the startups, will have that a chief economist or a chief economic officer, another version of CEO, if you will? How far do you think will come about in our business lingo and in the
Yeah.
small, medium businesses having this role?
Okay. I don't see that coming anytime soon.
So,
And
how far do you think then? 5 years,
uh,
10 years, 15 years?
no, I believe that the way this economics is thought through the education system has to change. And so sound economics has to be learned in the schooling system. Yeah. And I believe that eventually that will come. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not only through the academic system, but also through companies like mine, so to speak. Because economics is part of the curriculum that belongs to your general education. Everybody needs to know a little bit about mathematics. Everybody needs to know a little bit about physics.
Absolutely.
About
Likewise, everybody needs to know economics also.
yeah, yeah.
It
So
should be more of a. Yeah,
so and when you understand economics, okay, you can see things that are happening in day-to-day life around you. I mentioned that example with going to the supermarket. What does the supermarket want from you? What do you want from the supermarket? Um, that's pure economics. Um, why do certain people prefer to buy certain cars and other people prefer to buy certain cars that are maybe not that expensive? All that relates to economics.
correct.
What happens if the government prints money out of nowhere? Um, how does that change people's behavior? Not psychologically, but just in a natural way. So once you understand that through mental models that come out of sound economics, you look at the world in a different way.
Correct.
And it transforms your life, and you will say, this is BS. I'm not going to spell it for you. This is BS. And
Sure.
this really makes sense. And then you can make better decisions. So, but I believe it's going to be like that in a natural way. These chief economists, they work for banks. It's a title I was always very impressed with when I came out of university. Like, how does this guy know all that? But what these people actually are doing is they are looking at macroeconomics, which is they are looking at the surface of the economics. They are looking at the accounting books of a country. There is nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't say anything about cause and effect. Yeah. Remember, you asked me about cause and effect. The GDP of a country doesn't say anything about cause and effect on why it is going up or why it's going down. Also, when you look at the GDP of a country, which is measuring up the size of the economy, I live in Singapore. It's a small place with 5 million people, maybe 5.5 million of, I don't know, whatever. Okay. You are based in India with 1.2 or 0.3 billion,
The city I live in has close to 12 million population. So,
which is double the size of Singapore. So how can the GDP of India say something significant and that relates to the GDP of Singapore? These are just accounting numbers. It's like
right.
there's nothing wrong with GDP. It's a fantastic accounting statement, but don't read too much into that kind of stuff. So,
Right. With that, thank you, Bart. I think this was very interesting, and I think we've got at least one more topic to talk about. I mean, not from the future first point of view. I'm seriously keen on trying to. I'll try to reach you back to set up a time calling BS as separate podcast if we can do that. But with that, we'll also be sharing all the links as how to reach Bart and all the references, recommendations Bart has made. So I urge you to look it up and also feel free to reach Bart on those links that you have, which is shared right below this podcast. And I'm sure you also enjoyed it as much as I did, and hopefully Bart did in participating with this conversation. So if you did, please go ahead and share it across your network as well. But thank you so much for doing and also wish you all the very best. I think what you're doing is very needed, and may your tribe grow. And I guess,
thank you.
like it's always said, right, that uh, you make it big. I think there'll be many more who wants to make it big as well. So
Mhm.
in that context, I really want to see you make it very big, because that way we will have more people coming forward to doing what you're doing, and
Mhm.
that way every more business will start getting, their probability of success will only get better, because
Mhm.
today the probability of success among startups is less than 5%, not just
Okay.
India, globally.
Yeah.
So I think that is where what you're doing becomes so much more important, because that will contribute to a better success rate in the startups as well.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship is extremely important in the general economy, but
Absolutely.
we can talk about that in another session. Meanwhile,
Sure.
thank you very much for the opportunity, and I enjoyed it a lot to talk to you. Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And enjoy the ride till we meet again.